torturing Europe. Most points ever scored in the Ryder Cup. Congratulations to the United States Ryder Cup team. Neal McCready, he covers Ole Miss for rebelgrove.com, and they're in the top, just outside the top 10. Alabama coming up this week. Neal, what is what's the atmosphere like right now in Oxford?
Pretty intense, pretty excited. I think most people are, and it's been a game that I think people have circled since the schedule came out. And the beginning of the year, I think people looked at it and said it'll be a free shot for Ole Miss. And I think as things have progressed, they look at it and think of it as more of an opportunity than a free shot. Whether that's justified or not, we'll find out in 5 days. But Matt Corral's played awfully well. Ole Miss has been very impressive in its 3 wins, and their defense has looked markedly better than it did a year ago. And Alabama's the best. They're still one of the best teams in the country, maybe the best team in the country, but they don't look as dominant as they did last season with all those pros, especially on the offensive end. And I think there's some people that are holding out some hope that maybe there's a path to pulling off an upset on Saturday. We'll see.
If Ole Miss can get some sort of a lead and jump out with that offense, do you think that the defense is good enough to hold off Alabama?
Well, I think that's the key. I think you have to get ahead of them. I think you have to force Alabama to get out of its game plan, because I suspect Alabama's game plan is going to be to run the football, run it at a defense that a year ago was just awful. Just awful. They're not awful this year, though. They have some better personnel. They have a little more depth. I think they're a little more dialed in with their scheme. But again, Alabama's going to run it right at you. But if you built the lead, you put a little pressure on O'Brien and Saban over on that other sideline, because they have to look across that side, the field at Ole Miss's sideline, and go, that's Lane Kiffin and Jeff Levy calling plays. That's Matt Corral at quarterback. That's a pretty lethal trio. And if you fall behind too much, you have to abandon your running game completely, and that's the path to getting beat. And I don't know. I mean, do I think they're better? Yes. Have they been tested like they're going to be tested Saturday? No. Louisville does some nice things. Tulane has a nice offense, but they're not Alabama. But Ole Miss has handled those teams pretty well, and Ole Miss's offense is running so efficiently right now, and they can beat you in so many ways, and they can do it so quickly that if they built the lead, I think you could cause some panic on the other sideline, even a sideline as experienced and as successful as Alabama.
Neal, we saw what Ole Miss does quite often here in Waco a few years ago. Jeff Levy obviously was an assistant under Art Briles, and you see elements of that in this Ole Miss offense. But I know Lane Kiffin has his hand in it as well. How do they kind of work that? Both Kiffin being the offensive mind that he is, and Levy doing what he does. How have they been able to manage that and come up with what we've seen be so explosive on Saturdays?
Oh, I think it's Jeff's offense, and it just benefits from having a guy like Kiffin who is, the one thing even Kiffin detractors will say is that he's a guy that in real time sees things that most coaches don't see until they see the film. Or until they see the pictures from up above. But he sees it in real time from the sideline. And like I said, that's been proven to be a pretty lethal combination. I mean, they lost a bunch of games last year, but they didn't lose them on offense, with the exception maybe of the game in Fayetteville against Arkansas. Everything else was just the defense couldn't stop anybody. Look, Levy's a future head coach. I mean, he's a terrific coach. What he's done with that offense from a scheme standpoint, adapting to different personnel. A year ago, they had Elijah Moore in the slot, who was an early second-round pick of the New York Jets. They had Kenny Yeboah at tight end, who was a really good receiving tight end. They don't have that dominant slot receiver this year. They don't really have a tight end presence just yet. And yet they've completely just adapted to what they do have, which is a loaded running back core and 3 kind of big receivers who can go deep, can do different things. All of that is Jeff Levy's brilliance. And whether it's at Ole Miss down the road in a scenario where Lane Kiffin left, or whether it's somewhere else, I don't think it's long until Jeff Lebby's a head coach at the Power 5 level.
You know what's interesting is that Ole Miss has Alabama. Then next week it's Arkansas. We just brought up Arkansas. They get to play Georgia. I don't know if it's both teams coming off massive big wins or they're both they got settled down a little bit. You're in the SEC West. It's already Alabama. We know Auburn at times can flare up, and A&M had high expectations, and of course they've struggled because their offense and quarterback. So what is everyone paying attention to what Arkansas is doing in the West?
If they're not, they should be. I mean, look at what they've done. I mean, they've lined up, and I'll be family friendly here. They kicked Texas's ass on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the line of scrimmage. They said, well, they won't be able to dictate tempo against Texas A&M, and you can talk about a couple of things, right? You can talk about what KJ Jefferson can and can't do as a quarterback, and that's fine. And you can talk about, whether this is really the system that Kendall Briles really wants to run. Wouldn't he love to throw it more? And that's fine. You can do that too. And you can talk about Sam Pittman and, what he's done for culture and all of those things. And I think all of those are perfectly good storylines, and there's validity to all of them. But, guys, it's still a game that's played in the trenches. And Arkansas is really good on both sides of the line of scrimmage in the trenches. Like, that Texas A&M left tackle, he probably had some nightmares about 55 on Saturday night, because that guy ate his lunch, ate his dinner, stole his girlfriend, made fun of his mom. I mean, that was an ugly deal, and Arkansas has done that to a lot of people. And look, I think Arkansas is going to get a comeuppance on Saturday because I think Georgia's the best team in the country. But this whole thing about Arkansas is cute, Arkansas is a fluke, and Ole Miss is cute. And this league, this division's been like this for a while. You could take whoever the two bottom teams are in the SEC West this year and put them in the SEC East, and they're just no worse than third. It's a tough division. It's full of good teams, full of talented teams. Arkansas is for real. Arkansas could win.
Well, if they happen to take care of Georgia, then, and again, that's a different animal. Then obviously it's going to be interesting. Imagine that schedule, though. You have Texas on the schedule, and then on top of that, you're in the SEC West, and then your crossover game, one of your teams is against Georgia, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty tough. I think we lost Neal, obviously. Yeah. Get him back on. And, you throw OU and Texas into that mix here in a couple of years as well, so that'll be a lot of fun. But, Arkansas definitely for real, and I thought it was an interesting point he made about Kendall Briles and whether or not that's what he really wants to do, because I've wondered that too, because it's not like what you would typically expect Kendall to be doing. It's changed, but for good for Arkansas.
Neal McCready, he joins us again. We were talking about Arkansas. We heard most of what you said, and then we lost you as well. So, Lane Kiffin, you said that Lebby's head coaching material. We know that. He's got the lineage and what he's done now at 2 or 3 different places since Baylor. Is that something that is there anything that you see with Kiffin? Anything of interest with him as USC? Does that kind of die down with USC if it ever was there in the first place?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult for me to imagine that those two sides could reconcile that. I mean, they fired him on the tarmac in the middle of the season. The people are like, oh, Lane Kiffin would go right back to USC. I don't know. Are there places Lane Kiffin would probably go? Sure. Can Ole Miss win big and keep Lane Kiffin for 10, 15 years? Probably not. But look, there's SEC money, and you guys are well aware of it. I mean, the landscape of college football is changing, and right now, if you're in the SEC, you're kind of sitting prettier than most people. So they can afford to pay maybe things that other people can't afford to pay, and again, there are places he would leave for, I assume. It's hard for me to imagine that he goes back to USC unless USC puts out one hell of a formal apology at the front end of it, and then on the back end of it, they have to commit financially in a way that they're not committed today. And if you're USC and you're going to commit like that, are you really hiring Lane Kiffin off 1 year at Ole Miss, or are you going for a bigger fish? Are you talking to James Franklin at Penn State? Are you talking to, someone of that ilk? I would be inclined to believe that would be the direction they would likely go this year.
Neal, is Ole Miss in on Arch Manning enough, or is it? I know that Lane Kiffin is the only person he follows on Instagram is Arch Manning, or is that maybe more nostalgia for Archie and Eli?
Yeah, I don't think it's nostalgia. I know there's a report out that it's down to 2. I don't buy that at all. I think those two are very much in it. I think Texas is absolutely in it on Arch Manning. I know he really likes Austin from talking to people. I know that Georgia's in it. He was just there recently. I think Alabama's in it. I think Clemson is in it, maybe fading a little, but in it. But there's a ton of Ole Miss ties that go beyond Archie Manning. I mean, Cooper went to Ole Miss. They have a home here in Oxford. When the hurricane hit a couple weeks ago in South Louisiana, Arch was in Oxford for about 2 weeks. He was at an Oxford high school practice, and it started rumors that he was transferring to Oxford High School. He's not, by the way. In a couple of weeks, Ole Miss is going to play LSU. It's on October the 23rd. They're going to retire Eli Manning's jersey. The whole family's going to be here, Arch included. There's the Manning family ties to Ole Miss run really deep. And, Kiffin really likes him. Levy has a great relationship with that family. They're obviously doing a lot with the offense. There's a lot of talk that Arch Manning wants to do his own thing. And if he ends up not at Ole Miss, I'd buy it. But I think the belief that he's already completely dismissed Ole Miss at this point in the process is likely really incorrect. So, he'll be in Tuscaloosa this weekend on an official visit to Alabama, or a visit to Alabama, I should say. They have enough money. They don't need official visits. They'll be on a visit, at Alabama. It'd be interesting to see, does he feel something? He grew up an Ole Miss fan. Does he feel something that week? Does he feel something when he comes back to the LSU game? Or does he decide to kind of do his own thing? He can go wherever he wants to go. He's a really gifted player. But, Ole Miss is not going to give up on him until they have to give up on him. So I think all the talk that it's just nostalgic that's wishful thinking on other people's part. I don't know that I would make Ole Miss the favorite today, but I wouldn't bury their chances either.
Neal, thanks for your time, man. Have fun. It'll be a hell of a game. Should be fun.